So I got in at 10 o'clock. My goal was to leave at 10 o'clock that night. But of course, like the harbor master's done, like no one's going to tell you out. So I was able to get one of the cruising boats. He like left his dinner, got on his little dinghy and towed me out of the harbor with his little dinghy at 10 o'clock at night, just so I could get back on the race course and not wait for, the harbor master's rib the next morning.
Ahoy shipmates. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Andy Schell. Falcon just made landfall in Antigua. Some fun stats from their transatlantic. This is, I think, the 5th transatlantic Falcon has done since we bought the boat 2 years ago. They sailed a total of 3,017 miles. They were at sea for 16 days and 4 hours, average speed of 7.76 knots, and a top speed of 16.3 knots. That doesn't show up on the map. That is a surf record that Mia noted from the blogs. You can see the recreation of the passage on maps.59-north.com, where all of our former, future, and current tracking takes place. There's a really cool site there that our friend Chad has built for us. You can also read the blogs. Go to 59-north.com/logbook. They've been sending a ton of blogs in from at sea on this transatlantic. If you want to sail with us, we've got some openings this year. I'm just going to pick one that I think is really cool from the open bunks page. That's 59-north.com/bunks. Not sure why there's still openings on these, honestly. The Faroe Islands to Lofoten trip, that's passage number 2 on Eastbjorn. That's in the end of April, early May this year. Those are 2 spaces available and reserved for women, but that is a nice offshore trip from the Faroe Islands up to Arctic Norway, Lofoten, where we were in 2018, or I was anyway, on the way to Svalbard. One of the most beautiful places I've ever sailed in my life. I mean, absolutely spectacular. So if you're looking to go sailing and you want to get a trip in this year, check that out, as well as the other openings on 59-north.com/bunks. Today's episode is with Peter Gibbons-Neff. He was on the podcast years ago. We met in Kinsale. He had sailed in on his Mini. We were sailing out on Ice Bear. He's from Annapolis, so we'd kind of crossed paths a bunch. And we talked back then about what it took to prepare for the Mini-Transat. And I always love following up with people because now, it's one thing to say you're going to do something. Well, he actually did it, and he was interrupted by COVID. He didn't do the race he wanted to do, had to delay it. A lot of times that can derail your plans. It didn't for him. He kept chugging along and actually completed the race, I think last year or the year before, and is actually prepping to do another one. He wants to win. He got a taste of it, can't get enough of it, wants to win it now. Super, super, super inspiring, interesting guy. We met face-to-face in Annapolis. And I had a great conversation with him. I think you'll enjoy this one. This was actually recorded back in October, or I guess early November, when I was still in Annapolis. I've been keeping it since then. So hope you enjoy this, and we'll be back next week with another new episode. Until then, hold fast. On the Wind is presented by Forbes Yachts, our friends in Annapolis. They can buy or sell your dream boat, even if it's not one of theirs that is listed. Get in touch with Forbes Yachts at FORBES. That's ForbesYachts.com. In case you missed it, our monthly Skipper's Briefing newsletter now features one of our favorite boats that Forbes is listing, depending on the month. This month, I have selected an Alden 44 Mark II. Really unique boat, really classic, beautiful boat. This one's called Scout. It's in Harrington Harbor in Annapolis, and I sincerely suggest you check out our newsletter or go to Forbes' website and check out this listing, even if you just want to look at cool boats, because this Alden 44 is special, and it's also a really unique kind of like grayish blue color. So check that out, and check out the rest of Forbes' listings at ForbesYachts.com. Thanks again to Forbes for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. On the Wind is also presented by the Boat Doctor, custom electrical systems so you can cruise with confidence. Connor Smith, former guest of the podcast, has been doing some stuff on the quarterdeck for us as part of his sponsorship. So if you check that out, he did 2 videos so far on using a multimeter, specifically using a multimeter that clamps around a wire, and why that's so important in order to measure amps. Measuring amps in a DC system is crucial to both troubleshooting and setting up systems in the first place. So part of Connor's thing at the Boat Doctor is teaching all this stuff, and there's 2 great videos that he put on the quarterdeck for us. You can check out everything that Connor does at Boat Doctor USA. That's BOATDRUSA.com. Thanks again to Connor and the Boat Doctor for sponsoring this episode of the show. You're listening to On the Wind, my podcast about offshore sailing. I'm your host, Andy Schell. Peter Gibbons-Neff returns to the podcast to talk about the successes and failures of his Mini-Transat racing campaign. PGN and I sat down face-to-face in Annapolis, where he told me about losing a rudder shortly after the start in the Canaries, the hardest part about solo sailing a 16-foot boat, how the mini class doesn't allow even basic electronics, his military background and how that helps him offshore, plus his plans to one day win the Mini-Transat. All right, this sounds good. Let's just keep going. We were talking about boats right before we started recording here, and you were saying how you're always looking at listings. I am too. Hold the mic closer to your face. There you go. Okay. Closer the better. You were talking about your girlfriend and your boats and stuff, and I was going to say how much my taste in boats has changed. What's your? I mean, we had you on the podcast before. What's your background? Like, how did you get into sailing?
Yeah, so I grew up sailing with my family. From the Philadelphia area. Grew up sailing Opties on the Delaware River, 3 miles south of the airport there.
Yep.
Also, and then did a lot of sailing out of Annapolis too. And then in the summer times in high school, I actually lived with my cousins at their house and sailed out of SSA here. So I did a lot of junior sailing in Annapolis, summer times. And then my family also had a 40-foot boat that we used to race locally around here too. So between that, and then I ended up going to the Naval Academy. So I was on the offshore sailing team at the Naval Academy. So it kind of all came around for full circle.
So this is explaining a lot, because you it sounds like you came up more like performance sailing, competitive sailing sort of boats to make them go fast. Whether they were fast boats or not, I guess is subjective. But whereas I grew up on cruising boats. So like my taste in boats has always been, my dad, we had 3 catches when I was a kid. Like the first 3 boats I sailed on were all catches, like real salty looking, piratey looking catches. So my initial taste of boats came out of that.
Yeah.
And, but now that I've gotten more into sort of not the level of racing that you're doing, but like more sailing for fun, where you're on a faster, more fun boat. It's hard to go back. Falcon's a big 65-foot open transom performance boat, and like you get very spoiled on that. So, having all the performance stuff you've done in that mini you sail is like a freaking rocket ship. Is it possible to even go back to a boat like this? We're recording on my friend's Beneteau 37.
It would be hard. It'd be a challenge. Yeah, I mean, I just think I look back to kind of how my dad went through sailing, and he grew up sailing on a family boat. Started with, wire halyards and all the technology from back in the day. And they're still sailing that boat. Not my dad, my family's still sailing that boat.
What is it?
My uncle owns it. Oh my gosh, what? They're going to kill me. I forget but it's an old, like S&S boat though.
Oh, cool.
And so, but like my dad grew up sailing on that. And then in the early 2000s, he bought a FAR 395, which if you know that boat, carbon rig, a little more racer, cruiser racer type boat.
Well, it's like a FAR 40, right?
It's the cruising
version of a FAR 40.
FAR 40 with an asymmetric spinnaker.
Yeah.
And so when I was in middle school, my parents bought that boat, and so from age like 12, they just threw me up on the bow and said, "Hey, figure out how to do the bow on this thing."
Yeah.
So that's kind of what got me into the big boat sailing, was sailing on that boat, doing Annapolis Newport race at age 13. Starting.
Oh, wow.
So I was really fortunate to be able to sail with my family and have those kind of experiences before even going to college and joining the offshore team at the Naval Academy.
How'd you get into the Naval Academy? That's not easy.
I don't know.
Why? Why did you want to go? Were you a military family?
So I would say we had a lot of military family, but a lot of them did just a couple years. So like my dad did, I think, a couple years in the Navy, and Vietnam time frame.
Okay.
So we had a lot of, like, my dad and my uncles, a little bit of Vietnam experience, but most people only did it for a couple of years, then got out. So no, like, career family.
Yeah.
And then, 9/11 happened when I was in 7th grade. So from
How
there
old
on
are you?
out, I'm 35 now.
Okay, so you're a couple of years younger than me. Yeah, I was in, what was it? I guess I was in like a junior I was a senior. Yeah, junior in high school. I graduated in 2002 when that happened. Yeah.
So, that was just, that whole experience, living through that. That was definitely a big drive on the serving the nation side of things. And then also, really looked at getting the Marine Corps, at the time in high school, 2 wars, right? Iraq, Afghanistan, that was just full on. So there was a lot of, motivation behind all that. And then my cousin, who was a year older than me, he joined the Marine Corps. So now there's someone else that's like, dude. So we had a lot more Navy growing up, and then my cousin and I went the Marine side. But yeah, so that's kind of what led it. And then the Naval Academy was actually the only college I applied to. So I was kind of planning on just either enlisting.
That's confidence, man.
It wasn't confidence. I was just a dumb high schooler, and just was like, I didn't want to go to the normal college experience. That just wasn't me at the time. I really struggled academically when I got to the Naval Academy because I just really wasn't focused on the academic side. When I got there, I was more focused on the sailing side, and I was focused on like the military aspect, but then also just the sailing side. So. It took me a couple semesters to figure out how to actually study and learn, and get the grades up. But yeah,
I always wanted to go to the Naval Academy for no reason other than like I loved Annapolis as a kid. I grew up sailing here. My parents kept their boat in Rock Hall on the other side of the bay, and we'd always come to Annapolis as a destination, anchor out here off the Naval Academy. And I was like, man, I really want to go there, but I had like no interest in the military, complete opposite of you. So it's like, this is just a beautiful place. And of course, St. John's is here, but that's a whole different experience.
Yeah, a whole different experience. But it's funny that I didn't really learn about St. John's until after I graduated from the academy. And the more you hear about it, you're like, oh, that's a really interesting school. Like that would have been
super interesting.
That would have been an interesting learning experience.
Well, for the uninitiated, it's basically a small liberal arts college where everyone majors in the same thing. You get a philosophy degree, and it's like very exclusive, hard to get into, but you study, I guess, as I understand it, you probably know more than me, you study like the great books curriculum. It's like if you want to learn like math, you read Descartes and like all this kind of original text kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot less, sounds like the rigid tests and papers and grading and all that. But I got to tell you, one of the best intelligence officers I ever served with over in Afghanistan, he was a graduate from there.
Really?
And when I heard about that, I was like, no way. And he just had a different way of looking at situations and talking through things. And I think it's a really great education experience they have there. And, 2 great education institutions right next to each other across the street, but very different missions and goals and how they do it.
So what's you hear this lore about this croquet match that happens between St. John's and Naval Academy. Do you know what is the deal with this? So when I was there, it was an awesome experience. The whole town came out, and midshipmen and locals would come out, and it was more of just like a big social event with croquet there. Since then, they've made it a lot more regulated. You have to buy tickets to go there. So when I went, you just showed up, and it was just a fun time for all the midshipmen, the St. John students, and the locals. But it's a little more regulated now, and I've not been there in a while, so I don't know what it's like now. Do you know is like the story that people tell is that it was like a bar bet between the Naval Academy and St. John's, and the Naval Academy's guys are like, hey, we'll beat you at any sport you choose, and St. John's are like, all right, croquet. Is that apocryphal or is that true?
That probably sounds true. Your history might be a little better than mine, but that definitely sounds like a true thing there.
I hope it's true. I love that story. I think it's like a perfect like encapsulation of like the differences between the two universities.
Absolutely.
Anyway, the reason I wanted to talk to you, last time I saw you, we bumped into each other at Boat Show and we got to see your Mini. But I think the last time before that I saw you was you're sailing into Kinsale alone on your Mini, and we're sailing out on Ice Bear. That was in 2019.
And actually, I wasn't alone. My girlfriend Jane was there with me.
Oh,
so
excuse me. Sorry, Jane.
No, I only throw that out there because the reason why we were sailing into Kinsale is because I didn't have a visa because of COVID restrictions, and so I had to get myself and the boat really out of France. And the best logical place was Kinsale, 350 miles away. So we did a lovely 350-mile delivery through the Bay of Biscay and across up to Ireland. And that's when we saw you guys, was basically escaping from France.
So this was 2021?
Yeah, 2021, yeah. I think
2021, okay.
August, I want to say.
And I must have interviewed you before that even.
The winter before, I think.
Yeah. So like I always like to have people back on, when we talked first, you had all these big dreams and goals of doing this Mini-Transat. And then you did it. And I think it's really cool to have people on after, because, not everyone actually accomplishes or even tries to accomplish the things they say they're going to do. And I find that really cool when like somebody actually does it. And, I have to be completely honest that when COVID happened and you decided to delay, I was like, this is never going to happen. Like this, you could see like, oh man, what a shame. Like this, just to have this longer cycle to go through it. And then you did it. Like, How did you do it, especially with that long delay? How did you keep yourself motivated?
Yeah, so I think for a little bit of background on that, it was the qualification process. You have to do a certain number of miles, if 1,500 miles of racing in the class and 1,000-mile qualifier. And my goal initially was to do that all in that one season leading up to the race. And then I got delayed. My boat got to France, but I couldn't get in the country myself. And so I missed the first 2 races I wanted to do. So basically my qualification went from a 1-year thing to a 3-year campaign. And so that's what slowed it down. But yeah, I wasn't going to, once my boat was over there, and I mean, the second I bought my boat here in Annapolis, I was committed to doing the Mini-Transat. So yes, it went longer than expected. But it ended up being the new plan. And yeah, I think the other hard thing too is I'm sure you have people on here that have big dreams or big goals of what they want to do. And I think the hardest thing for me was getting to that process where I could tell people I'm going to go race in the Mini-Transat. The amount of, weeks or months it took me to actually build up the confidence and say like, yes, I'm going to go do this, instead of just, hey, I want to do this, or this is what I'm thinking about doing. It's a hard leap, I feel like. And for someone like me I feel like I have imposter syndrome a lot of times where I don't feel like I should be in that spot. Like that spot's not mine. I don't deserve that spot. It's hard to build up the confidence to tell people, to get on a podcast like yours and tell you, hey, I just bought this boat. I shipped it over to France. I haven't done any solo sailing. I'm going to go do the Mini-Transat. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it went. My first solo sail on the boat was from Normandy down to Le Trinité-sur-Mer. So 360-mile delivery through the English Channel in the Bay of Biscay. That was my first solo sailing experience. Wow. And so, yes, sometimes I feel like, hey, it's hard to get over that initial insecurities. But at the same time, I have no problem jumping out there and doing a solo delivery like that long, because I've had confidence in my skills, I had confidence in my boat. Leading up to that, I already had, probably 8,000 miles of offshore experience.
On that boat or other boats?
Other boats.
Yeah.
But it had been 10 years since I've been offshore.
Really?
The last time I was offshore, I had a BlackBerry. So very different experience being offshore with Navionics on your cell phone now. We're like, oh, this is easy. Like I could do this,
Wow.
So times have changed since the last time I was offshore. But honestly, listening to some of the podcasts, like your podcast leading up to my whole campaign, that's what kind of gave me the confidence again to be like, oh, I'm hearing Andy or these other people talking about these sailing concepts. I haven't thought about that aspect in a decade, but I feel like it's starting to come back to me and I'm starting to remember it. So I actually listen to a lot of podcasts to build up that knowledge base again, to be like, oh yeah, and I know what people are talking about. Huh. Now, not everyone says everything cool. accurately or correctly on podcasts. So you got to also pick and choose what you believe.
Filter that, yeah.
But I did like your methodology of how you'd kind of talk to some of the other people when you're interviewing. So whether it was your podcast or other podcasts, I got a lot of that knowledge that I might have forgotten, came back to me pretty quickly before going offshore for something like that.
It's interesting that you talk about imposter syndrome, because I feel that sometimes. A lot of what I'd say are the most successful people in sailing that I know also feel that, and I'm defining success not purely by it's basically anybody that has any feelings feels that imposter syndrome. They have some level of humility, some level of empathy. That makes the best leader, I think, as well. But you get this weird sense of, well, I don't belong here. How did you manage to reconcile with that?
I think the more time I spent on the boat out offshore, the more times I survived some pretty wild situations, the more I realized I can handle this. I mean, since we've talked last time, I've sailed my Mini 15,000 miles.
Yeah.
So I feel like over the course of those miles, I feel like I built up the confidence to be like, okay, I feel better about this now. But am I going to go through that again, for the next campaign? Absolutely. It's not like it's just done now. But yeah, I think just working through it and realizing the more, and you don't just start with the Mini-Transat. You start with a 200-mile offshore race, then you do a 400-mile offshore race, and then a 600-mile. So you build up to it. So it's just making those little incremental goals and having a plan. I think that's really what helped me get along through challenges like that of, hey, I have to do these 4 races this year. Let me build up to them. And I think that's really what helped me get through it.
So I have a bunch of practical questions. You say you bought this Mini. How much did it cost?
About $45,000.
And then how much work did you have to do to it?
We put in a lot of work onto it. So, but then also,
I guess, hang on, we should back up a second. Tell people what the Mini-Transat is, because
that's great. Yeah.
Let's establish what we're actually talking about here, because it's a very unique boat.
Yeah, so it's mini, but the challenge is not mini in itself. So the Mini is 6.5 meters long, or 21 feet. and 3 meters wide. So it's a small boat, but it's designed for offshore racing.
And it looks like a Vendée Globe boat, just miniaturized.
It's a miniaturized, Mocha almost. That's kind of the way you look at it. Yeah, or a smaller Class 40 or something like that. And so the whole boat is designed for one race, and that's the Mini-Transat, which is a 2-leg solo race across the Atlantic Ocean. First leg is from Les Sables d'Olonne in France, so right where the Vendée Globe's leaving from, down to the Canaries, rest and refit for 2.5 weeks, and then you restart the race for the long leg, and that's from the Canaries across to Guadeloupe. So that long leg is 2,700 miles
on either end.
Yeah,
tell where this originates.
exactly. And then most of the boats get put on a container and shipped back because actually the sailors, they're not allowed to sail their boats back because they have to get special permission to even do this race. So at any time, the French government could say you're not authorized to do the Mini-Transat. So one of the ways to get permission to get some exceptions to the French sailing or the offshore regulations is by saying, hey, all of the boats are going to be shipped back on a cargo ship, so you don't have to worry about like people being out there by themselves out in the middle of the ocean.
Part of it is you're sailing sort of in company in a race.
Yeah, and there's a certain number of support boats per boat. So in this race, now they're doing 90 boats per the race, so 90 competitors. So they have to have, I think, like 7 support boats out there.
Really? I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so they have support boats. Doesn't mean they're always going to come support you. Or
yeah.
I mean, I would say most races I do, I'm not in VHF range of the support boats.
Yeah.
So yes, they're out there.
What are the support boats?
French cruising boats, sailboats, a wide range of.
Because like you're freaking hauling ass. I can't. How do they keep up?
I'd say we are, but also there's periods where hey, you hit 2 days of no wind, and now that cruising boat's just motoring at 7 knots and catching up to you. So
interesting. I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, or they might just take Rumline, and you're 300 miles south of Rumline. Took you a day and a half to get down there. So
and it's like basically, as I understand it, it's kind of like a feeder for Vendée Globe aspirations, like people that this is like the entry point for that.
Absolutely. So from the Mini-Transat, a lot of sailors go to the Figaro 3 or the Solitaire de Figaro, and that's a solo race offshore around the French west coast there in the Atlantic. And then Class 40s, and then the IMOCAs, the 60-foot IMOCAs, solo nonstop around the world. Vendée
Which
Globe.
Is going to start in, a week or two?
Yeah.
As we record.
Yeah, this time next week, I'm going to be in France over there for the start of it to go
hell
watch.
Yeah. Cool. Do you have aspirations to that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I really want to go.
So how do you, and maybe it's a good thing that you're career military. I mean, my next question was going to be, how do you manage to take the time away from, like, you're 35? I assume you're not independently wealthy. Maybe you are.
No.
So how do you manage, how do you do all this?
It's been a challenge. I mean, for going into this campaign, I saved up money for a couple years going into it. But then, so this was all tied to my time of getting off active duty. So I did 10 years active duty, full-time military. Really got away from the sailing for a little bit, so I wasn't spending a lot of money on boats at the time.
Yeah.
And then
where were you deployed? Where were you?
So I've been deployed Afghanistan. So my 2 main deployments were, one was 9 months in Afghanistan, Helmand Province. I was there in 2014 when we first shut down the base in Helmand Province there. And then my other deployment was on a ship, like Marines embarked on a ship. I was a battalion landing team intel officer. So, but I think we had 1,400 infantry Marines and support element there. So I was the intel officer for that element that was across 3 different ships. So we went from east coast of the U.S., like North Carolina, across the Atlantic, Mediterranean, Red Sea, Arabian Gulf.
Wow.
And along the way, we stopped different places. So what do you think about... we did exercises in a couple, like Djibouti, Africa. We did exercises in Israel. We did... we were on standby for a lot of like embassy reinforcement missions. So when I was there, I was there when the U.S. launched 70 Tomahawks into Syria at the time.
Jesus.
So we were on standby of like, hey, if something else goes on, like, do we need to go into Syria? Do we need to go into Egypt? Do we need to go into Israel? The U.S. Embassy was moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, so we were on standby for that. So you think about all these places we're on standby as the crisis response force, as the Marine Corps element for the United States.
So you're basically there, like, if shit goes wrong, they're calling you in.
Yes.
Man.
So that was, 6 months of floating around there. We spent a lot of time in the Red Sea. And it's everything from conventional, nation state things to, hey, the Houthis are launching missiles in the Red Sea. Like, are we going to do anything about that? Are we out? So there's just, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it was a challenging time. And that was 2018. So there was a lot going on. But yeah, so those are some of the deployments, and then been stationed a couple places across the U.S. And then my last 2 years was actually at the Pentagon.
Oh, cool.
So I was supporting senior leaders at the Pentagon with the Navy and the Marine Corps with intelligence support for that. So yeah, it was an eye-opening experience, but then I was also ready to get off active duty.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't completely walking away from the military, so I switched over to the reserves. But when you get off active duty, you have something called terminal leave, which is your paid days saved, paid time off. And I essentially had 3 months of saved time. So my terminal leave plan was buying this boat and going over to France with
That's
it.
what you named the boat, right?
So the name of the boat is terminal leave.
So cool. I love that.
Yes.
Wow. All right.
So that helped fund part of it.
Okay.
But then a lot of it also was donations. A lot of people were supporting donation, trying to support this campaign and the cause I was raising awareness, which I'm sure we'll talk about with U.S. Patriot Sailing.
Yeah. Well, we're parked next to one of their boats, ironically.
Yes. Yeah. So, and we could talk about that now if you want.
Yeah.
So U.S. Patriot Sailing, it's a nonprofit organization and it supports military veterans through sailing. So talk about navigating challenging times of getting off active duty or coming back from a combat deployment, or, hey, you transitioned to a civilian life 30 years ago, but maybe you still need some help. Like, let's get you in a safe but interesting environment, dynamic environment. And it's amazing the kind of conversations you have out there when you're sitting on the rail, whether it's a day race or an overnight race and it's 2 a.m. and you're just talking through like, hey, are you doing okay? Or like, what's going on with you? Or, or maybe, hey, maybe everything's okay. So not everyone that's on the team is going through a challenge, right? So we have a healthy mix of veterans that some of them want to be there to help others, and some of them are really going through a challenging time. So like when I first joined the team, I was doing it because the director of the team reached out to me and said, hey, we could use some help on boat work. Can you come help us? Sure, I'll come to Gibbons on a cold February and start working. A couple of days of boat work later, and then started sailing with the team that season. And before you know it, I was sailing with the team, 3 days a week, doing Wednesday racing, weekend racing, all that kind of stuff. That is what really got me back into the sailing, because I'd left it for a while with the military.
So this is prior to the mini stuff.
Yeah, this is prior to the mini stuff. And then I also didn't realize until maybe a year or two later that team actually, even though they were asking me for help, I was going through a divorce, come back from deployment, going through a divorce. I didn't realize how much help I needed myself. And so that healthy environment of those teammates being there together for me, even when I wasn't seeking help, but I didn't realize until afterwards, like, oh no, I needed a lot of help myself. So they were there for me in that time of need.
That's
so
cool.
I really wanted to do something to raise awareness for the team and to say thank you to the team. And so that's where this kind of all came together with the Mini-Transat was, hey, I'm transitioning myself. This is one of the major goals for the organization, is to support people transitioning off active duty. That's what I'm doing myself. And I want to raise awareness for the team nationally, internationally, get more exposure for the team, because it's 100% volunteer run. It's a nonprofit. We run off grant money and donations and sponsorships. So if we don't raise the awareness, we can't get those donations to help continue to support the team. And we never turn anyone away. You sign up and you're part of the team. You don't pay anything as a veteran. You sign up. You sail for as many or as few days as you want. So it's all about getting more veterans part of this team that they have access to. It's not like there's some other great programs out there that maybe do, hey, you do a 1 weekend sailing with us. And that's great. We have that persistent engagement in a couple key areas across the U.S. where, hey, if you want to go sailing 3 days a week, you can go sailing 3 days a week. If you want to go sailing, and we focus a lot on racing, but it can also be ASA certifications, or it can be cruising, or we want to get into more, hey, you come back from a deployment, let's get your family together on a cruising sailboat and go do a weekend cruising. And we have another veteran that's skippering the boat for you, so you don't have to worry about everything that goes into it, and you can kind of relax and decompress with your family. So there's different things that we want to pursue, but it all just takes funding, and it's all volunteer run right now. So it's,
I mean, what you said about like the things you learn about each other sitting on the rail at 2 a.m. or whatever, like that's one of my favorite things about ocean sailing, specifically what we do, because you get, and like the longer you're out there, the more that stuff comes out. So we're doing it with people recreationally, and you still get these profound conversations, and you learn about people and everything like that. And it must be really interesting and really revealing when people going into it knowing that's what they're going for, because it kind of happens by accident on our trips. And you guys have I think that's really cool, and I can say that, like, it's hard to explain, but when you're in that mindset, you sort of enter this different reality almost.
It's a powerful experience that it's very hard to replicate onshore.
Yeah, sure.
And it's and you're having these conversations, but you're also still thinking about, hey, we need to be safe out here. Like,
Right.
but we're also trying to push the boat. We're going as fast as possible. We're racing.
But you're also like wet, sleep deprived.
Exactly.
And your brain is just in this sort of alternate state just by default of that. And then you add the mental health aspect on top of it. It's a powerful combination.
And it allows you to kind of reach into some deeper areas that you might not be comfortable or might not normally reach into. But hey, you survive a nor'easter out here off the East Coast, and then you start opening up and talking to the people out there. You survive some of those experiences where you're like, and I say survive. It's not like a survival situation, but you know what I mean? Like you feel like emotionally you survived.
Yep.
Where, hey, we just beat upwind in cold, rainy weather for the last day and a half. That was miserable, but I'm in such a better state now emotionally.
Well, so all right, contrast that with now you're out there by yourself and you don't have any of that support network. So like, what's that like?
So one of the ways I frame it is the 2 years leading up to this, working at the Pentagon, I was working with 20,000 of my closest friends. So it was kind of nice being out there by myself for a little bit.
That makes sense.
But no, what I would say is, yes, you're out there by yourself, but when you're racing, there's for the Mini-Transat, there's 90 other competitors out there. You don't feel alone.
Yeah.
Put a little asterisk on it. We'll get to that point. You don't feel alone. And also a lot of times you're in VHF range, so you're talking to your buddies and saying like, "Hey, how you doing?" Or they screw up the spinnaker jibe, and you're like, "You're all right over there?" Like, what'd you do? Maybe give them a little hard time if you're friends with them. And you're out there together. Like I remember one night I was racing from the Azores. I can't remember if it was Azores back to France. I think it was Azores back to France. I remember it was one night. It was like 2 a.m, and of course everything's 2 a.m. It was dark.
Right.
Some part of nighttime, and one of my bolts that was holding on the tiller bar to my rudder like fell off. The nut came undone, and so I lost steerage for a little bit. So I had to replace that, and I was like, oh, that sucked. Like, I had to get the spinnaker down and fix it and all that kind of stuff. And 30 minutes later, I'm back out on the race course. Okay, we're fine. But like I lost steerage and was like really mad about that because you lose a couple miles, and then I talked to my other buddy on the VHF radio, and he's like, oh hey, that sucks, but I've been lying on my back for the last 8 hours because I threw out my back and I'm on painkillers right now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, your situation. Okay, that's a little worse than what I just had to go through.
Yeah.
And part of it's like, you doing okay? And like, you just like, you're still joking around about things, but it's also like, there's a very serious aspect to throwing out your back when you're 1,000 miles offshore by yourself. But he also knew that I was eight miles away and we're talking on the radio. So like if he did actually need more help, like I would come over there and come save him in a heartbeat. Like, that. So yes, you're out there by yourself, but especially when you're within radio communication, you feel a lot closer. It's when you break from the packs and you're out there by yourself and you have no one on VHF, within range.
And
that's when
you
you're
would
really
do
by
that
yourself.
for like a strategic reason, presumably.
Potentially strategic. A lot of times it's because something breaks.
Okay.
So I would say a lot of the boats stay in packs because sometimes you have that pack mentality, but a lot of times it's the most optimal route to go.
Right.
So you generally stay in packs. So you're trying to get to that next weather system or you're trying to go for some strategic advantage out on the race course. So you generally that's together. But a lot of times boats break off from the pack when they break something, when something goes wrong. They can't get the spinnaker up for a couple hours, and now they lose sight of everyone. We also have AIS transponders, so you can see a little bit more, but 12 miles at most?
Yeah.
I mean, my mast is only 35 feet high, so you talk about the range is very limited on a Mini. So once you lose sight on them on AIS, that's when you're like, oh, wow, I'm out here all by myself.
You start thinking about it in a different way.
Exactly.
So I was surprised. We saw your boat was in the boat show and we got to go on board, which is super cool. But I was surprised at how limited the rules are with communications.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So we have VHF radio, but we have a GPS for navigation, like a basic GPS, but we can't have a chart plotter and we can't have satellite communications. So we can't have a sat phone. You can't have your Garmin inReach. You can't even have like a backup sat phone locked away in a case. Like I was going to
ask that. Is there like a sealed case thing for emergencies only? Break glass?
No, you don't have that. And on top of that, we also have to turn in our cell phones to the race committee at the start. So every mini race that we do, whether it's a 200-mile race or the Mini-Transat, we turn in our cell phones at the start. And the race committee gives your cell phone back to you at the finish line.
So, like, you're not even listening to podcasts and stuff.
Actually, I did because I bought some cheap MP3 players.
Oh, man.
This is the way to do it. If anyone's listening that's doing the Mini-Transat, buy an MP3 player that you can download apps like Spotify, but it doesn't have a built-in GPS, and it doesn't have a way for, like, a chart plotting capability. That's the kind... There's plenty of them on Amazon. So I had Spotify, so I could download a bunch of podcasts and audiobooks. I mean, I listened to 14 audiobooks on the long leg across.
Wow.
Because I was using that to keep me awake while I was hand steering.
How many days was the passage?
20 days.
Jeez, that's like a book a day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So yes, you can listen to music, you can do all that stuff, but the biggest limitation is you need to have a way to have that without having a chart plotting capability and without satellite communications, or cell phone communications. That's the biggest thing.
I actually really love that. I mean, do they say why they make it so restrictive?
I mean, I think it's been an evolution of the rules. So the Mini-Transat has been going on every other year since 1977. So, when they started this race, it was purely cell nav. Now, we still have to demonstrate a cell nav capability, and we have to have a sextant on board.
Cell nav, you mean celestial?
Yes. Celestial.
Navy speak.
Yeah. So we still have to have a sextant on board. So when I did my 1,000-mile solo qualification sail, I had to demonstrate I can do celestial navigation at sea by hand with the notebooks and all that kind of stuff, and send it in for approval for them to say, yes, we approve that you can do this skill. Now, doesn't mean I can do it very well. No. Have I practiced it since then? No. But it was that capability and having that, if I was out there at sea and I lost everything and I had a couple weeks to figure it out, I think I could figure out how to do celestial navigation again.
My favorite thing, I say this all the time, but Matt Rutherford, people ask him, hey, do you do celestial? He's like, no. He's like, you're going to hit land eventually. It's like, you just keep sailing. You'll find it eventually.
I like that too. Yeah. That's why you got to have a compass, or you follow the sun. Yeah. But, so that's kind of the restrictions. But it makes it interesting because it's also part of the fact that this is a feeder class for the other bigger classes. So it forces you to learn the skills. So you have to have
I was just going to say
charts.
that it focuses on the fundamentals.
Yes.
And I really like that.
It's the fundamentals while you're going over 15 knots with a spinnaker up surfing down a wave.
Yeah.
So, that's the hard thing. When you do some of these coastal offshore races, you're going really fast with a spinnaker up, but you're also plotting your course on a paper chart while it's rainy, while you got white water coming over, and you're trying not to hit a rock or run aground.
I mean, all this on a boat that you can barely sit up in.
Yeah,
let
there's no
alone
nav
stand
desk.
Up in. I was like, you go down first of all, I was like, how the hell do you even get in and out of this companionway when there's any sort of sea state? It's very cramped. And then you go down below and there's no like cabin sole. It's just, you see the stringers and the bilge and the keel bolts. It's all just right there.
Yeah, and most of the boat is glassed in foam. For emergency, if you have water come in to displace some of that water. So you're just sitting on all that glass and foam on both sides, and you're basically putting your feet next to the keel bolts. That's all it is.
So I was surprised at how dry the bilge was. Is that the case offshore as well? Is it really a dry boat?
No. It depends. So the problem is a lot of water comes down on your foul weather gear. So if you climb down there with your foul weather gear on, you're going to bring all that water down with you. And then every time you bring the spinnaker down, I douse that through the companionway entrance down to the bottom. So if that brings in water, but if you're not doing those two things, like if you're staying on deck during a squall, or if you're not bringing down the spinnaker, it can be pretty dry. Now it gets really humid, because there's not a lot of ventilation down below. So actually, I don't have any other hatches down below to open up to ventilate the boat. They've changed the rules since then. So minis now have to have at least like one or two hatches, like a forward hatch, a small one, just so you get a little ventilation.
Okay.
My generation didn't have any of that. So it gets really humid down below if you have any water.
I'll tell you what, too. It's impossible to describe what the heat is like on a windless day in the trade winds, like with no shade. It is something.
Well, I don't know what's worse, that or when you're sitting in the English Channel freezing cold and everything's just damp and you can't warm up.
Man. I think I'll take the
heat any day over the damp cold.
Really?
Where you just can't warm up.
At some point, you can't cool off either. You can't take enough layers off. Like, you can always add layer, climb in your sleeping bag.
And that's the reason why we should only race in the trade winds, in the comfortable latitudes, right? Like,
yeah. So, all right. What did it, like, you've been spending, I guess, from the lead up when you bought the boat, what year was it when you bought the boat?
I bought that in September 2020.
Okay. And the start was when?
The
one that you did.
The one that I did was September 2023.
So you have 3 years of lead time with also like a delay in there that you weren't counting on.
Yeah.
What did it feel like to actually be out in that starting sequence with all these other boats and you're like actually doing it?
It was unbelievable. It was surreal. Like I didn't. One, it was like, is this really happening right now? Two is, I can't believe they actually let us do this. Because like, who in their right mind lets us actually go do this, right? And then, it was hard to describe, but it was an emotional experience. I mean, I feel like everything in the Mini-Transat is an emotional experience, whether you're crossing the starting line, you're crossing the finish line, stuff breaks, like it's so much, there's so much emotions behind it because of those 3 years leading up to it and all the time sailing the boat, the preparations for the boat, the late nights just trying to like get things done in time for everything to happen. There's so much that goes into it that anytime something goes right or wrong, you're just trying not to cry almost. It's like just trying to get through it. But it's, I don't know, crossing the starting line, and it's not even just crossing the starting line, because when you're crossing the starting line, you're in race mode, right?
Right. So,
but I think it was when you're coming out of La Sable d'Olonne and you have the channel, which is like the famous like Vendée Globe channel with everyone on either side of you, cheering you on, because all the boats get towed out. So everyone gets gets all these people cheering them. And seeing my family up there, like that was unbelievable.
Because you're still, I guess you're not in the like focused frame of mind yet. You're just trying to enjoy the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you're still in the, like, I'm still in the race mindset, but you are trying to enjoy it. You're like, okay, let me just enjoy the moment for a second. I'm just getting towed by a rib. There's nothing I can do right now other than just steer. Big thing is don't run aground. Don't hit anything. Because that's the biggest concern is, like, you if you can't cross the starting line in a certain amount of time, like, you're done for the race.
Yeah.
If you can't finish the first leg, you can't start the second leg. So there's things like that where you got to think about of risk management. Hey, I have to complete this leg of the race. I have to get to the starting line. I have to cross within a certain number of hours. Otherwise, I can't get out on the race course. So all that's going through your mind while you're like, hey, let me enjoy this for a moment. Let me just, stand here and just enjoy the experience. Yeah.
And how many boats are on the line at the same time?
All 90 boats.
So how the hell, like, how do you even navigate that?
And
what was your strategy? Like, what was your goal on that start?
Win the pin end, which everyone else wanted to do too.
So you actually weren't, you were just like, you were going for it. You're not just like...
It wasn't win the pin end, but I was like going for pin third, and it was a code 0 start with the reach. And so that's the other thing is, we have big bowsprits on these boats. Normally, we're not allowed to cross the starting line with the bowsprits deployed. But for certain races, they allow you. This race, they amended the SIs, and they're like, you are allowed to have your bowsprit out. So all 90 boats had their bowsprit out with a code 0, which is bowsprit, and also a lot of boats have struts. So if they're not the big wide scout bow, a lot of times they'll have a strut going on either side.
Yours had that, right?
Yeah, so I had the struts. So now you have these boats just with these big spears out there, and now you got half the fleet fighting for the pin end of the line. Yeah, I was within half a boat length of like 3 boats at one point, all fighting for it, being, telling them to get up, and you're the leeward boat and don't want them coming down on you. And you're doing that as if it's a Saturday race out here on the Chesapeake Bay, but you got 1,300 miles to go to the finish line for that leg. So it's really close, intense racing, because it's amazing the advantage the boats that get a good start, they can really extend a lead if they play the cards right. Now, that being said, also boats that don't have a great start, they still have a good chance of catching up if they have a good strategy overall. But having a good start is a huge part of it, and it's also just the fun aspect of it. You don't do 3 years of preparation just be like, you know what, I'm just going to take the start easy and just be in the back. It's like, that's not my style.
That's cool. I love that, man. That's really cool. That's not what I expected you to say, actually.
Oh, really?
No, I was more, because I'm not a racing sailor. I would have been like, yeah, I'm just going to get across the line without breaking anything. You're like, no, man, let's go for it. I love that.
I guess, but I think our two philosophies go hand in hand together. So I have the same philosophy.
Sure.
Hey, I wanted to get a really good start. I also don't want to break anything. I don't want to hit anyone.
Yeah.
So I'm going to communicate with my competitors around me early. Hey, if I have rights over them, hey, like...
And I guess everybody else is in the same game. Nobody's trying to mess anything up.
The hardest thing is everyone's out there by themselves. So I think there was a collision leading up to the start, like port starboard on the line. You just can't always see. The sails are so big. You have big jibs on these boats.
Yeah.
You can't always see everything. And so it's really easy for boats to not be able to see each other and then inadvertently hit each other without knowing it. Yeah.
Back to some of the nerdy stuff. We were talking about like sail plans and stuff and how restrictive that is. So describe like what you have to work with actually out there.
Yeah. So they give you a limit on the number of sails you can have. So most boats go with a main, so 3 reefs in the main, a jib that's also all-purpose reefing jib, hank on to the headstay.
So it hanks on, and then you lower it and like roll up the foot. And
Yeah,
it has
so it's
leech points, like old school reef points.
No, it does have some backup reef points, but really it's a zipper reef.
Oh,
so
okay,
you roll up the bottom, and then it zippers up.
Yep.
And so then you have, and both tacks are floating tacks, so they both have a line on them, so you can easily change from one tack to the other without changing a shackle or anything like that, because it's all floating tacks.
Yep. What does that mean?
So the main tack, the original tack, has one little line going from there down to a friction ring on the bottom, at the bottom of the forestay. So I can adjust the height of the tack on the jib. So when I need to go reef and roll up that bottom part, I just release the tack line and it easily rolls up. And the new tack line gets pulled down, snugged down.
So you're kind of reefing it up first, then lowering the sail down.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And so then there's a new clue point as well too.
Yep.
So you can either, a lot of times I'll use a second jib line or jib sheet to tie to the new clue point, or I can also use a soft shackle where I can use the original jib sheet and just move that up to the soft shackle and have it hold it basically. So there's two different options for the sheets as well. But yeah, that's the main thing.
That's it. One jib.
One jib.
Wow.
And so, but you reef that thing. It's a great stay sail when you're downwind with the spinnaker up though.
Okay.
So,
do you carry storm sails?
Yeah. So you have to have a storm jib, and then it's optional to have a storm trysail. I brought the storm trysail just because if I need to get across in my mast breaks, like that's a great additional sail to have.
And I guess I mean imagine the size of a storm trysail on that little boat probably fits in a briefcase.
It's probably like the size of this table that we're sitting in front of right here. Yeah, it's not too big. But the other thing too is I've really only used the first and second reef points. I've never used the third reef point in anger on my boat.
Wow.
So because the second reef, it's still such a small main that you go into the storm trysail, like I don't see myself really going to the storm trysail unless I knew, hey, I have a lot of advanced warning. There's a bad system coming through, and it's that much of an advantage, or I'm worried about the mainsail. But for the most part, we just do like the first and second reef on the main. You're good, even being in like a 15-knot squall, like second reef on the main. I'm good with that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say about the trysail. Just to digress for a second. People often talk about heavy weather, all this stuff, and our boats have done 130,000 miles since 2015, and I don't think we ever once used the storm trysail because we had to. The only time I ever used it on Eastbourne was because the mainsail split in half, the old main split in half, and then you have it. So it's like one of those things. It's like it doesn't mean don't take it, but realistically, you're probably not going to use it. And if you use it, it's probably because something else broke.
Or the other thing that happens too is by the time you want to use it, it's too late to put it up because you're like, I don't want to get out of the cockpit.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so what about the kites and stuff?
Okay, so like I was saying before, there's just a maximum number of sails you can bring, but most people bring an A2 running spinnaker, an A3 reaching spinnaker. Some people have a reef point in that. I have a reef point in mine.
A reef point in the spinnaker?
So my reaching spinnaker is a masthead spinnaker. I can reef it from the bottom, just like the jib, like roll it up. Now it becomes a fractional spinnaker. So it's more...
Describe the difference.
Okay, so this reaching spinnaker, it's more...
But just the fractional masthead, because the boats are fractional rigged, right?
Well, I have a fractional rigged with
which means the head stay only goes, 7/8 of the way up the mast?
About that, yeah. So normally when we're flying the running spinnaker, it's masthead spinnaker. With this reaching spinnaker, I can use it at a masthead height, or I can bring it down 1/8 of a way down to that fractional point.
So there's another halyard there where the head stay attaches.
Yes, there's another halyard there. So that means it's a little bit smaller of a spinnaker, smaller luff, smaller sail area, takes out, a certain, maybe 15% of the sail area, something like that. And it takes out a little bit of the body. So if I'm on a really tight reach, or let's say as the wind increases, I can have a smaller spinnaker up there while still having that spinnaker and not getting rid of that capability completely.
Yeah.
The other thing that's nice is, hey, let's say I have it up the masthead height, and I'm reaching. Let's say the tack blows out. Hey, I can bring it back down. I can roll it up, and I can use that second tack now.
Cool.
So it does have a little bit of redundancy.
I've never heard of that before. That's really neat.
Yeah, and so it has a big zipper reef along the bottom third of the sail.
So what do you mean by that?
So when I reef the spinnaker, I have to reef it before it goes up.
Yeah.
And so basically you take the bottom section of sail and you roll it up and zipper all the way across where that new... The zipper ends up being about a foot above where that new foot is of the spinnaker.
So you're basically rolling up the material and then just zipping it into itself.
Yes.
So it stays contained.
Yes. And then it's a new tack and a new clue point on that sail.
Yeah.
So the original tack and clue roll up into that. Yeah.
So clever. Such a simple, clever way to do that.
And so now you got one sail that can do two different functions without counting against your limit.
Right.
The other spinnaker that we used to have on the boat was an A5, but 2 years ago they reduced the number of sails we can have by 6 down to 7, or 7 down to 6, or something like that. And so most boats got rid of their A5, which is a bit of a gap in the sails inventory. So having that reefed A3 really helps kind of mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah.
Not entirely, but that's just one of the challenges that we have too.
And just we've talked about this in the podcast before, but for people not familiar, the numbers represent reaching versus running.
Yeah.
So like an A3 and A5, those are reaching sails, right? And a running sails are the even numbers.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, good point on there.
No, I just like to get nerdy on this
I
stuff
know.
because it's fun. It's fun, especially because I only learned some of this stuff recently when I started getting into racing myself. But like as a cruising sailor, you never messing with these kind of designations. But it's pretty easy to understand.
Yeah, and then also because we have a lot of flexibility with what we want, it's like, hey, do I go with a A3 reaching kite or do I go with a A4 kite? Because I didn't have to go with the A3. I could have gone with more of an A4, more of a fractional running kite if I wanted to. So you have a lot of flexibility going into this Mini-Transat on your sail selection based off the boat design and everything.
What was the hardest thing about it?
Of the race?
Yeah.
Oh.
Like like the actual sailing. What was the hardest thing when you were out there?
The hardest part of the race was by far about the 2 days that I was in a really, really low emotional point after getting through breaking my rudder off, going through that whole repair. And then once I got back on the race course, knowing that I was 500 to 700 miles behind the fleet,
damn,
I felt like the biggest failure for the next 2 days. And I was at the low point right then and there. And I spent after those 2 days of just feeling sorry for myself or feeling like a failure. It wasn't so much sorry, but I felt like a failure. I felt like I'd let down everyone that had been following the campaign for the last 3 years, or friends and family or sponsors or everyone that had been supporting this campaign. I felt like I'd let them down at that point. But then, and that, when I still had when I fixed the rudder, I had 1,800 miles to go. So I had a lot of miles to cross at that point from Cape Verde Islands over to Guadalupe.
Just run through that because that was a pretty cool. You were talking about that when we visited the boat. What actually happened and how'd you fix it?
Yeah. So we start the second leg of the race. I didn't do great the first leg, but I was like, you know what? I'm ready to push the boat hard. Like I am ready. This is my leg of the race. I'm ready to do it. Part of starting the second leg is you got to finish the first leg. I'd finished that. So I had the boat. I didn't have any major breakages that first leg, which, can't be said the same about a couple other boats. One boat broke its keel and he had to abandon ship. Another boat broke its mast. So, overall my boat was doing pretty well. And so I was ready to push the boat hard, and I did push the boat hard. I don't think I pushed it too hard where I was breaking things left and right. But the biggest problem is, so let's see. So 5 days into the race, I am going pretty far south, trying to get into the good southern trade winds. The fleet had really split a lot. Some boats were going north of Rumline. Some boats were going south of Rumline. Few boats were going on Rumline because there was a big area of just no wind. So you really had to go north or south. And it took about 2 days to make that decision.
Where was the start from again? Canaries?
In the Canaries.
Okay,
yeah. Santa Cruz de la Palma.
Okay.
So we left Santa Cruz de la Palma, and then we had to leave one island, Hero or something like that. We had to leave that to starboard. And then once you left that one island to starboard, you're basically out in the open ocean.
Yep.
And so some boats went north, some boats went south. I chose the southern route trying to get into those trade winds. Yes, a little bit longer, but more consistent breeze. Whereas the northern route, they had a lot more frontside to go through. They had more, the routing showed maybe a day and a half advantage, but the challenge of the uncertainty with the weather patterns and trying to time the weather patterns correctly. And hey, if that area of no wind on the rum line, if that moves north 100 miles, now you're sitting in no wind for 2 days. Yeah. So I knew based off my boat's capabilities, because hey, we don't have grip files, we're not doing routing. I'm going to go south in the trade winds and getting that consistent, stronger trade wind breeze.
That's right, because once you leave, you're not getting gribs anymore. You're just
not getting grip files.
Wow.
Well, what we're getting is every day at 1500 UTC, the race committee gets on single sideband radio and broadcasts a voice weather update.
Okay.
But when you're talking about the weather, think about getting one single wind forecast for Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, North Carolina,
the whole area.
I mean, because the boxes are a couple hundred miles wide each, and so they're only giving you the areas where the boats are also going to. So they're not giving you all the areas. They're not giving you the entire ocean, but they're telling you, hey, where's the low, where's the high, where are the fronts, and here's 10 to 15 knots from the west, or whatever it is for that 200-mile grid box. Yep. So I know my forecast isn't going to be that accurate overall, and you're trying to interpolate it yourself. But getting back into that, so I was 5 days into this race, right? Going south. One of the newest prototypes, they jibed over and crossed maybe within visual range of me.
Wow.
5 days into the race. So I'm like, this is awesome. Which we haven't even talked about, the prototypes, much faster boats, same size. They start with us, but they're scored separately. Made out of carbon fiber, cannon keel, taller rig, longer keel. They're fast boats. So the fact that I was 5 days into the race with one of the brand new prototypes that was 2 years old with a good sailor on there, I was like, yes, this is awesome. Side note, that sailor got third place in the race in that leg.
Oh, wow.
So like she did very well. So I was happy that, a couple hundred miles in the race that I was right with her. So she was going west. I was still going south at that point. I'd say maybe like 12 hours later, I probably hit jibe over. So I'm going west now, day 6, going west, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's beautiful out. Probably steady 25 knots of breeze. I'm going 13, 14, hitting up to 16 knots. I got the spinnaker up. Like, things are great. I mean, I'm hand steering a lot. It's all about playing the main sheet and driving, and definitely wiping out occasionally here and there. But I'm flying. I mean, I'm doing 200-mile plus days at this point.
So cool.
And it just feels good. Everything feels good. Like, mentally, I feel good. I've been eating food. I'm hydrated. I am really enjoying the race. Like, this is why I did the 3 years to get to this point. Like, this is awesome. I'm pushing the boat, but I'm also not pushing it beyond its limits, though. Like, I feel comfortable having, and I go back and forth between the A3, reefed A3, or the A2 spinnaker, depending on if it's a lull or how the wind's doing. But I think at this point I had the big A2 up, and like, everything's good. Reef jib as a staysail, and a reef in the main. So you're doing teens consistently. It's
so
awesome.
Cool.
1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm hand steering, everything's going good. All of a sudden, I lose a little bit of control in the tiller, and the boat just wipes out. So you go from 14, 15 knots to wiping out, and you're like, what just happened? Like, there wasn't a wave, it wasn't a puff, like, and I look back, and as I'm wiping out, I can see my rudder getting dragged behind the boat, the port rudder getting dragged behind the boat by the tiller bar. So the metal bar that connects the rudder to the tiller, that's the only thing holding the rudder in. But it's,
you have twin rudders in the boat.
Twin rudders, yeah. But the rudder is 3 feet behind the boat, getting dragged as I'm going 14 knots, wiping out right now. And I'm like, what just happened? So that's where we go into crisis management mode, triage. I mean, that's what 10,000 miles of sailing got me to that point of like, okay, now, have I experienced this before? No, but like, do I know what to do right now? Like, absolutely. So like, let's, a couple of things. You got to drop the spinnaker really quickly, like get that down. I got that down really quickly. The other thing too is, am I sinking? Do I have water coming in? So you got to stop the boat, make sure you don't have water coming in the boat. I got to get the rudder back on because I don't want to lose the rudder also, because what if the little fiberglass part of the tiller that holds that tiller bar in, what if that fails? And then my rudder's going to sink. It weighs like 40 pounds or something ridiculous. Like, the rudders are not light. They're big fiberglass rudders. So I don't want to lose the rudder. So it's all about getting everything just like back onto the boat. Don't sink, and kind of just assess the situation. And oh, by the way, it's blowing 25 knots and you've probably 8 foot seas. So the boat's just getting rocked all around once I get the sails down and I stop the boat. But
yeah, all of a sudden your apparent wind just increased by double, probably.
Yeah.
Everything feels a lot different.
And you got a couple of those 8 foot waves hitting the beam of the boat, and it feels really big. And now, I wasn't worried about getting rolled over or anything like that, but like, I was more worried about getting a head injury as I'm trying to assess the situation. Yeah. Now I hit my head on the bulkhead and knock myself out.
I want to just focus on one thing you just said, where you said you hadn't been there before, but you knew exactly what to do. And a lot of people ask us, like, do you ever get scared offshore? And I've always said that, like, fear is a function of not knowing what to do. I think fear, like, you just don't know what to do. And in that case, when you do know exactly what to do, I assume you weren't afraid in that moment. Yeah,
I wasn't afraid in that moment. I'll give you an example of fear where I think the most times I get fear is when there's nothing you can do and you're just sitting there waiting for something.
Yeah, that's a good example.
The worst time that happened to me was actually finishing my 1,000-mile qualifier off the coast of Ireland, maybe, I think just off of Cork area. I was probably 2 miles offshore, getting hit by a cold front, waves coming in from 2 different directions at night, blowing 40 knots. And I don't know if my boat's going to break in half or the mast is going to break. Like, I don't know which one's going to break first, and something's about to go wrong. And there was nothing I could do other than just try to get through the next wave.
Yep.
That's where the fear comes out, where you're like, I can't really do anything other than just one wave at a time. This was a different situation where, okay, I'm in crisis management mode. I got 10 different things to worry about. There's not really fear in that situation, unless water starts coming in, or unless, like, as long as the boat's floating, I can figure it out.
You still felt in control.
Yes, absolutely. It wasn't a survival situation at that point.
So what'd you do?
So got the sails down, got the rudder back on board. And also, getting the rudder on board is not easy because I have to go find my tools, because I have to get the right wrench out and things like that to undo the nut and the bolt that's holding the tiller bar on. So got that on board. I ended up, and then because it was rocking so much, I ended up putting up a sail. I think it was probably the jib first. Put the jib up, jibed over, because now I can only use one rudder, because the second the boat heels over at all, I would wipe out.
The rudder's out of the water.
Because they're angled.
Yeah.
So now I can really only use my starboard rudder on port jibe. So I start sailing, start thinking about like, okay, where am I going? And I look, the angle that I'm pointing at, downwind on port jibe, just happens to be right to Cape Verde, to those islands. I had never been there before. I know plenty of cruisers go there. I knew nothing about those islands, but I'm like, I know cruisers go there. I can probably go there.
I was there in February.
Exactly. My other option would have been, do I go farther left or, towards Africa and go on the west coast of Africa?
And you have no comms, I guess.
Yeah, I have no one to call.
Jeez.
So I can't ask anyone for suggestions or anything like that. The other thing too is, speaking of comms, so when the whole rudder broke off and everything like that, once I kind of got the situation under control, I also call on the radio, both channel 16 and then also the race channel 77 to the other competitors, depending on, they should be listening to both, but in case, we're on both channels, no one responds. So none of the other minis are even around me at this point within VHF range. So no one else knows that anything's gone on with me. But everyone watching at home can see the tracker. Hey, I'm going 1 knot, 2 knots right now. Something's going wrong.
Yep.
So on the Yellow Brick tracker, they do have a couple preset text messages on there. So I sent the one that says presence on board, all okay, or something like that. Like, I basically let the race committee know, like, hey, I'm alive on the boat. Like, it's okay right now, but like, keep an eye on me, because like, I might not be okay 12 hours from now.
Right.
Like, I don't know if something's going to go wrong, like, but I'm okay. I'm on the boat. But you also notice, like, I'm aiming the wrong way right now, not towards the finish line. And so on the Yellow Brick tracker, they basically acknowledged, like, okay, acknowledged. And then a couple hours later, they were like, hey, can you just like tell us what went wrong? But I also know, based off the rules, I'm like, I'm not allowed to really communicate with the race organization. Like, I don't want to also like overshare too much information and like get myself in trouble, because one of the things is you're not allowed to communicate with the race committee except if it's a medical emergency. They'll talk to you as much as you want about a medical emergency, just because they don't want you having that thought process in your head of like, hey, something feels wrong. Like, I don't want to ask them because I don't want to get disqualified. So with that, we do have a texting feature on the Yellow Brick tracker, and you can text. But let me tell you, it is not easy texting because you have to scroll through all characters, like letters, digits.
We used Yellow Bricks as well, and it's just a little, like a cursor pad with an enter button. There's no letters, nothing. And I can't imagine.
And it's attached to the pulpit on the back of the boat. So you're an 8-foot sea. So when I say it took 15 minutes to send one text message with like 6 words in it, it took 15 minutes to do that.
I can fully...
backwards.
I can picture that.
So all I sent on the text message was, rudder broke, Cape Verde repair. That's all I could say. And I didn't want to overshare too, because I don't want to ask for help. I don't want to ask for anything.
Yep.
And so they acknowledged it. So when they put out a press release, they're able to say, hey, we know he had rudder damage. Something broke with his rudder. We know he's going to Cape Verde. That's all we know. So at least like other people know
the world now
going
knows. Anybody that's paying attention to the race knows what's happening.
But it's not like I'm pulling up a sat phone saying, hey, let's talk through the situation.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm 270 miles away from Cape Verde, which actually feels very close at that point. When you're out of the ocean, 270 miles, you're like, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Like, that's awesome. I had a book, one of the pilot books, where I can see Cape Verde and start reading up on the islands. Not a lot of detail in that book, but just enough to get me there. And the hard thing is, all I needed was like 8 6mm stainless steel bolts. That's all I needed. So the whole rudder and the pintle and gudgeon were all attached to the rudder still. It was just the bolts that hold the pintle and gudgeon to the hull, all sheared the hull. So all I really need to do is get new bolts, replace them, I'd be good. The other thing is I had to do a little bit of fiberglass damage repair to the leading edge of the rudder as I was sailing down there.
Because you think you hit something?
I definitely hit something. I don't know when or where.
Yeah.
I did not feel it. I think the bolt just finally sheared off after maybe a couple hours after hitting something.
Yeah.
But definitely hit something that ripped it off, though. It wasn't, and those were brand new rudders that year too. I had them brand new made, and then also professionally installed by a company that does all the Class 40s in France. So like they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So like it wasn't like I didn't put enough money into this part of the boat, or no, I put a lot of money into that boat, and I actually had professionals install it.
Yeah.
Like the same company that was taking the bow and stern off a Class 40 to redo that, like they were installing this part. So like it should have been fine.
Yeah.
But big ocean, there's a lot of stuff out there. Like when you're going in the teens and you're hitting something, like So unfortunately, that's the reality we live in. But so I'm doing the gel coat repair. But I'm looking in the book trying to figure out like, okay, I just need to find a little boat shop that can have a couple of like stainless steel bolts. Like I don't need a dry dock. I don't need a 60-ton crane. Like that's what's all in this book is stuff for like commercial ships.
Right.
And I'm like, oh gosh, I should have looked through this more before I started the race to be like, if I have a problem, I'm actually looking for like a little chandelier, like boat shop, not some massive like repair facility. And so I started looking at the places to Cape Verde, and then what was the place? Mindelo?
Mindelo, yeah.
Yeah. But on my chart, really there, it's Porto Grande. It's like the port. Most people know it's Mindelo, but Porto Grande, that's part of that's probably 50% of my thought process was like big port. Like,
yeah, sure.
This sounds good, like big port.
Yeah.
And they have an immigration control.
Literally.
So they have immigration where you can check in and out of the immigration there. So I'm like, okay, because of those two things, like this is probably a good place to go because yes, there's a lot of islands, but there's not a lot of places you can actually pull into. Or there's plenty of places you can pull into, but not a lot of places that actually have the repair facilities that you might need.
Yeah. So
I spend the next day and a half sailing down there, just trying to gauge like, okay, what island should I go to? And so, but I finally decide on that island. And I'm sailing there with reef in the main or 2 reefs in the main and then reef in the jib and sailing downwind. And I'm trying to push the boat because I want to get there quickly, but I also don't want to break the other rudder because if I break the other rudder, it goes from a challenging race situation to a survival situation at that point. Because if I don't have any steerage, that boat does not. You can't sail that without the rudder. I mean, you can. It's possible, but you're going to be going now half a knot with the drogue out behind you, trying to do that whole.
Yeah.
If that even works.
You're not racing anymore. You're just trying to survive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I didn't want to do a survival situation. And actually, same thought process when the rudder broke. I'm like, hey, could I do the next 2,000 miles on one rudder?
Right.
Should I go across?
Yeah.
For half a second, I thought about it because I'm like, 270 miles out of the way. Like, I don't want to lose distance. Like, I want to go to the finish line. And then, but I was like, that's also what I was thinking. I was like, hey, if I break that rudder and I'm 1,000 miles offshore, now that's a survival situation outside the range of any assistance. So, so clearly going down to Cape Verde was like the responsible decision. And I'm like, okay, I'm not out here trying to kill myself. Like, let's make sensible use of this situation. So, but then as I'm approaching the island, I'm calling them on the radio. No one's answering from the dockmaster. I'm like, I'm fully expecting to get in there and to have them say, hey, you need to go 3 islands over there.
That's where customs is or whatever. Yeah.
I'm fully expecting them to turn me away and say that there's nothing here. As I start approaching, it's blowing 25, 30 knots and I'm actually jibing and I keep wiping out because I only have one rudder and I'm just trying to get to this one port. And I'm like wiping out. I'm at one point aiming towards the rocks of this other island. I'm not trying to hit, but I'm trying to call the ley line to get over. And I'm literally planing coming into the port with one rudder. And I got 2 other cruising boats next to me. And they're all watching me with like big eyes being like, oh my gosh, what is this person doing? And yeah, it was so as I'm coming in there planing and all of a sudden it gets really light. And now I'm sailing upwind, short tacking, trying to get up towards the port. And then as I get up there, I'm like, okay, there's the docks. I cannot pull into the docks with no motor right now. So I try to anchor, and someone else is like, you can't anchor there. I'm like, I'm anchoring right here. Like, I end up like...
I can picture... I mean, I was there in February. Yeah. I can picture exactly where you're talking about.
Yeah. So I anchored just next to the mooring field, a little bit in the channel, and someone's like, you can't move there. I'm like... I'm good right here.
Yeah.
This is not happening because I tried once going through the mooring field and it was pretty painful. And then I anchor. Some guy comes up to me on his little dinghy and he's like, "Hey, I'm from North Carolina. What are you doing over here?" I was like, "Wow!" Like the first person I run into is an American, and he drives me into shore and takes me into the customs or to the dockmaster. Be like, "Hey, here he is." I get to as I'm getting to the dock, they're all like, "Oh, are you Peter?" I'm like, yes. How do you know who I am? They're like, oh, we've been expecting you. I mean, it's Saturday morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, and they were waiting for me, basically. So
because word got out that you were headed there.
Well, so luckily my girlfriend Jane, who's been helping me through this campaign for the last couple of years, she's the whole time. She coordinated through her Women Who Sail Network on Facebook and the Magenta Project and like other like groups that she has internationally, reached out to as many people as she could, and through those people met like the right person to contact the dockmaster. And there was a whole repair facility there, like where they work on boats. And I think their slogan is like, if it's man-made, we can fix it, is like their slogan. So like they fix anything. And so they were all ready for me at 10 o'clock in the morning, ready to build a new rudder, design a new rudder. Like I also had one of my old rudders on standby getting ready to get flown down from France because someone happened to be going there on vacation. And they're like, oh, I'll just bring it with me on vacation and meet him there. So because Jane didn't know if the rudder was sheared in half, if I lost it completely, what the deal was.
Yeah.
And when I showed up and I'm like, hey guys, we just need 8 bolts. They're like, yes, let's do this. They were done fixing it in 4 hours. I mean, it was a 2-person job. They had to do it from a dinghy. Like I had to pull out all the gear and shift the boat over so I could get that side of the water, the boat out of the water. Like not a job you could do at sea with one person, but with 2 people at a dock, they were able to do it. The dockmaster helped me tow the boat in. As I'm getting towed in, some guy on the on one of the boats on the mooring is waving, is filming me, saying, "Hey, say hi to Jane." And I'm like, "Is this a random Swiss guy who's on his boat?" I'm like, "How are these people like? How do they know what's going on?" And then all the people on the dock, there happened to be a rally going from France down to there. So all the people on the dock are all French. They all love the Mini-Transat.
Yeah.
So now I'm like trying to fix the boat, but I'm like the celebrity on the dock because they all want to see what a Mini is like.
Oh, man.
Because they literally just came from the same Vendee area that we had left from. And so it was just like a surreal experience. You know, I haven't seen anyone in 7-8 days at this point. And now I'm just surrounded by, 20 people at a time trying to talk to me and see everything, which it was great meeting everyone. But at the same time, I'm like, I got to focus on the race here.
Get out of here.
I'm still racing. And I got to dive the boat, make sure the keel's okay. Ate lunch. There's a great little restaurant. The restaurant was like 20 feet away from my boat. I got like 2 lunches there, 2 entrees. And she looks at me like, you want 2 entrees? Like, yes, please. Got 2 showers that day. Like I was just like trying to just do as much as I could, because the other thing is, even though the repair was done in 4 hours, I had to stay there for 12 hours per the race rules.
Oh, I see.
So if you pull in for a technical stopover, you have to be there for at least 12 hours, no longer than 72 hours.
Okay.
So I got in at 10 o'clock. My goal was to leave at 10 o'clock that night. But of course, like the harbor master's done, like no one's going to tell you out. So I was able to get one of the cruising boats. He like left his dinner, got on his little dinghy, and towed me out of the harbor with his little dinghy at 10 o'clock at night, just so I could get back on the race course and not wait for the harbor master's rib the next morning.
So all right, that's an amazing story, and like sounds so inspiring. And yet we started the story by saying that after this, you were at the lowest point in the race. How did you lose so much momentum? I mean, I would have thought the opposite, that like you must have felt like, I did it, I fixed it, I figured this out. What happened in the interim? I
think part of it is when I finally lost all the adrenaline of like fixing everything. So I had a lot of adrenaline going into that. I mean, I was in race, even when you're pulling into a dock, you're still in race mode and you're just trying to get as much as you can done. You're optimizing the boat. I mean, as I'm at the dock, I'm replacing one of the halyards that's getting a little bit chafe, and like you're doing as much as you can to prep to get back on the race course. Once I got back on the race course and I lost that adrenaline, and you're just in that steady state. And I mean, I'm still pushing the boat hard. I got this. I mean, I guess when I left, I was doing a little like upwind sailing initially, and then got out there and then put the spinnaker up. And then it wasn't planing conditions, because I was maybe like, I'm going 8-9 knots on boat speed. So like I got this, it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Like that's a comfortable, for the boat. I'm not planing, I'm not wiping out. But at that point, my whole body just starts like decompressing and just slowly relaxing, and you lose that adrenaline. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I need to get some sleep. Like I'm exhausted. And then you wake up from that nap and you feel a little bit better. And then that's where you just start thinking, like my mind just started taking me places where you're just like, it wasn't a great feeling. And then the other thing, the next day at 1500, I get the race result or the update to see like, okay, let's see how far back am I from the race course or from the leaders. And I'm like, when you're 700 miles behind the lead boat, you're like, there's no way I'm catching up to them.
That's when you're just like, oh shit, this maybe didn't work.
And I still have 1800 miles to go.
Yeah.
But then part of me is also like, okay, the other boat's 500 miles ahead of me, like maybe. But then the other thing too is what helped me was the fact that I knew based off the forecast where I was going. One, they weren't even forecasting the area I was in because I was so far south of everyone. So I didn't even have a forecast of my area. But I knew based off of what they were saying, I had much better wind than the rest of the fleet. So like, okay, there's a chance. I was also so far away from everyone that when I left the dock, I had to call the race organization to get permission to leave. And they said, you have permission as long as you understand you are so far away from everyone. There's no safety boat coming to get you. Like there's no one that's going to turn around to get you because you're so far behind if anything goes wrong. And it's on you. It's like, yeah, I accept that risk. Like that is on me. I fully understand that.
Wow.
And so yes, there's safety boats out there, but when the race organization says like they are too far away to turn back for you if anything goes wrong, like
the stakes go up a little bit there, hey?
Absolutely. So all that's going through your head, and then as I'm going through this, kind of process, I'm still processing everything. That's when I really feel like the failure, because I'm like, yes, I got back on the race course, but like I didn't do a 3-year campaign to get last place.
Yeah.
You know, like there's so much that went into this, so much time, resources, money, and you're just like, that's not what the goal of this. And so
Did you think about quitting?
I don't think I ever really thought about quitting. I was going to finish this one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I was just, there was just so much like thought. You have no one to talk to. You have no one to say like, hey, you're not a failure. You're still doing this. So it took me 2 days to kind of talk myself out of that.
Yeah.
And I got to post some more videos on YouTube though. But I took a video of myself shortly after that, just being like, hey, like we're going to get through this. Like the reason why I did this race is to raise awareness for U.S. Patriot Sailing, and that connection with the team. When I started connecting the dots and kind of thinking through that again and being like, oh yeah, this is the reason why I did this. It wasn't to be out here by myself on a boat to go fast or do it. Like this was for the team. And when I start thinking about like, am I accomplishing the mission by raising international awareness for the team? Absolutely. Am I providing, has it helped support get more donations for the organization? Yes. Has it helped raise awareness for the team to get more veterans who didn't know about the team want to come join the team and have a part of that, camaraderie and have that support network? Absolutely. So when you start thinking about all those things, yes, do I want to do well place-wise? Yes, but at the end of the day, does that really matter for that race?
Well, the irony is almost you may have accomplished that mission even better by having had that experience. Even though you came less in the race, like now you have this story to tell about resilience, and that may have done a better job to accomplish that other mission besides just doing well in the race.
And you're absolutely right on that. And that's the kind of stuff like I'm not thinking about at the time because
right.
You still have so long to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. So when I realized like I'm still accomplishing my mission of what I'm out here to do, it just took me a while to like come to grips with that though, because I had no one to talk through. I had to think through that. And by the way, while I'm thinking through that, I'm still sailing downwind with Spinnaker up. Now I'm starting to plane. Now I'm going fast. So, fast forward 2 days as I'm talking myself out of there. Now I'm hitting those 15, 16 knots of speed again.
Yeah.
And I spend the next 9 days like planing across because I had steady 25 knots of breeze.
Yeah.
And I was doing 220-mile days at that point.
That's crazy, man.
Across.
It's so funny because, we did that exact same route, although to Barbados on Falcon. And, we averaged, I think, 201 miles a day. And you're talking about doing 220 miles in a 20-foot boat. That's like wild. I thought we're flying on Falcon. It's 65 feet. That's so cool.
I was going fast.
So what did you, you talked about like that you're not done yet. You're going to do this again on a prototype. What did you learn through this whole experience that you're going to take that and like, why do it again? Like, what did you not accomplish that you still want to accomplish?
I mean, I want to go win the race. That's a big part of it. But there, so this was, I mean, the boat I did it on, the Mini-Transat, the first race, the first time anyone does the Mini-Transat, it's always going to be, like that's the learning race, right? And like you're never really ready for the Mini-Transat until you finish the Mini-Transat. And then once you cross the finish line, you're like, okay, now I'm ready for the race.
Yep.
And so because I have that built up, I'm like, after 15,000 miles on my Mini, after doing the race, like I want to go do it again. And if I go do it again, I don't want to do it on the same boat. I love my boat, but I don't want to do it on that one. I want to do it on, it's over 10 years old now. I want to do it on a newer boat. I want to go do it on a prototype, a little different, carbon fiber, cannon keel.
Well, they got
foils
too, right?
now. Absolutely. I want to go, and that's also part of my background. Is like I want to go push the boundaries of performance. That's one of my other passions is pushing that, and I think it still meets the mission by raising awareness for U.S. Patriot Sailing. As I continue to push those boundaries, that's what also helps get the message out even further.
Yeah.
So I was able to get the message further out with a 10-year-old series boat that I didn't do great, but I had this whole experience. But now imagine raising awareness for U.S. Patriot Sailing with a brand new prototype that has the potential to win the race. Like that's a whole another level of supporting the team.
So you're going from $40,000 for a used boat to
it's going to be a couple $100,000.
Really?
Yeah. But
Damn.
It's still way cheaper than a Class 40. So
yeah, but that's next then after that,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. But when you put it in perspective of a Class 40 of the IMOCA, when you start talking about people that want to either donate their money or sponsors that want to support this campaign, it is still way cheaper than doing a Class 40 campaign, but still has a lot of international recognition and
Sure.
and spreading the message of whatever company brand that wants to support it as a sponsor. But yeah, it's not cheap. But we're talking about a couple $100,000 instead of a couple $1 million that you'd be talking for a Class 40 or the MOCA campaign.
I mean, I've had Pip Hare on the podcast 3 times, I think, and I think she's the best.
I love her interviews. By the way, I just listened to her interview like last week, and it was awesome.
Yeah,
I love
that
listening
was
to her.
one of my favorite ones recently. But like, she's a perfect example of like bootstrapping the whole thing and figuring out. And now she went from similar story, but at that next level of an old boat. She did really well on it, got sponsorship, and now has a new boat. And is doing it again in a week or two.
And I think what people don't see is like, it's hard. Like what she does is hard.
Yeah.
And you know, you don't do it like we don't do it because it's always fun. Like there's a few aspects that are fun about it, but it is a hard life trying to make something happen. Connect, you know, go from start to finish of doing a whole campaign, getting across the starting line, and then getting across the finish line, being able to make the funding happen, be able to make the timeline happen, all the qualification that goes into it. Like we don't do it because it's easy.
Right. Well,
and
that's
so there's a lot of money
yeah.
that goes behind it and resources, but it's not like we're seeking funding for like an easy thing that's just like a fun, like it's not a weekend cruise.
Totally. What I mean, what's you said, is it 2027?
2027.
So that's it's only 2 years, almost 2.5 years. What's your life gonna look like between now and then? Because we already established you're not independently wealthy. You presumably still have a career. Like, how does that timeline look like for you?
So my goal, I really do want to focus full time on like the professional sailing side, especially like this ocean racing. Like, I would love to go do an ocean race. I want to go do the Vendée Globe. Like, I want to go do those types of things. Like, that's my passion and my desire. But right now, I am back on active duty orders for a year with the Marine Corps. So as a reservist, I had the opportunity to apply for a 1-year master's program. So right now I'm a master's student, but getting paid the active duty paycheck. So at least I'm paying rent right now because.
What are you, master's in what?
Military studies. So I'm at the rank
sufficiently vague.
Yeah. So it's military studies, but it's at the Marine Corps University. For anyone that knows, it's the Command and Staff College. So it's where they bring in 200 majors from across different services and international partners. And it's basically an academic environment where you learn military studies, planning, operations, like joint planning operations, with also like political science and military history involved in it.
Cool.
So if you think about planning like a joint operation or a coalition, operation, that's where we really focus on for a year.
Cool.
Yeah.
And how do you fit the sailing? Like, is it after that you're just going to be like full time?
Well, and now I'm able to do the weekend sailing. So for instance, tomorrow I'm racing with U.S. Patriot Sailing in the Frostbite Series here in Annapolis on the J109 right next to us.
Nice.
So I'll be skipper in that boat.
Cool.
Which is awesome because now that I have that, I can sail with the team on the weekends. Whereas before, when I was doing all this, I couldn't just go do a Frostbite race with the team. It was harder to do as much sailing with the team when I'm doing the campaign. So it's actually nice having the year back here to spend time, reset, you work on the next campaign, sail the Mini here locally. Because also, by the way, when I finished the race in Guadalupe, I sailed the boat from Guadalupe all the way back up here to Annapolis.
Oh, wow.
So we have the Mini back here at Gibbons.
I saw it. It's just up here in the yard, right?
Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, hey, man, we got to wrap this up because I got to get this battery project going. But we got to do a part 3 here because I want to hear about like the new boat and all the rest of that stuff and how that works and logistics. And, you've already proven yourself that you can do this. So this won't be the last time you're on this show.
Awesome.
But, this has been super fun. And I have more questions now than we started. So we got to do a couple more of these.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been great being here, and happy to come join the podcast anytime.
Yeah, cool, man. Thanks a lot, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Forbes Yachts for sponsoring this episode of the show. Check them out at ForbesYachts.com. That's FORBES, ForbesYachts.com. Thanks also to Connor and Boat Doctor for sponsoring this episode of the show. Get in touch for all your electricity needs at BoatDoctorUSA.com. That's BOATDRUSA.com. On the Wind is the podcast about sailing, created by 59 Degrees North and hosted by me, Andy Schell, and also by August Sandberg, Emma Garshagen, and occasionally Ben Doer. The show is mixed and produced in Frederick, Maryland by Lee Cumberland. Ads are read by us, the hosts, and occasionally by 59 North's bosun Adam Brown and podcast producer Lee Cumberland. Episode artwork and website show notes are done by Laura Parent in San Francisco. The intro theme music is composed and performed by former podcast guest and musician Cameron Dale, while the outro music you're hearing now is, of course, by our friends, the Storm Weather Shanty Choir. We love hearing from our fans, so send your questions and comments to holdfast@59-north.com. And please do us a favor and review the show on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts. Until next time, hold fast.
I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. As I was walking down the street, I met sweet Angeline. She said, come home with me, me lad, and we'll have a cracking time. But when I awoke, it was no joke. I found I was all alone. My silver watch and my money too, and my whole bloody gear was gone. Was gone, was gone. My whole bloody gear was gone. It was when I awoke, it was no joke, for my whole bloody gear was gone. As I was walking down the street, I met Big Rapper Brown. I asked him if he would take me in, and he looked at me with a frown. He said,
last time you was paid up with me, you took up no score. But I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more.
once more, once more, to go to sea once more. I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more. Sometimes we're catching whales, me lads, but mostly we get none. With a 20-foot oar in every paw from 5 o'clock in the morn. And when daylight's gone and the night's coming on, we rest upon our oars. And oh boys, you wish that you was dead or snug with the girls ashore. Ashore, ashore, or snug with the girls ashore. Oh boys, you wish that you was dead or snug with the girls ashore. Come all you seafaring lads that listen to me song. When you go a big boating, boys, make sure you do not go wrong. You take my tip when you come off a trip, don't go with any whores. But get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more.